Hey everyone, it's Sarah and I am back to film my reading journal for the month of March. So diving right in, I like to track how much time I spent reading each day. So as you can see in the month of March, I had a lot of 2 to 4 hour days. And I mean, that could be, I pick up a book multiple times throughout the day for 15 minutes at a time. It could be I read 2 hours in one sitting and then didn't read the rest of the day. I just, take the average of total time spent reading in the day when I'm tracking this. Then looking at my overview, I read 11 books this month, 4,115 pages, and then my favorite book of the month, which I kind of picked by default because I believe this was my only 5-star read, is The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. And we'll get into all of the books in just a minute. Then looking at my monthly calendar, I like to put when I started and finished books. And as you can see, I had a lot of things that I read on weekends and a lot of things I read at the end of the month, just trying to finish up reading goals, trying to finish up books that I had started. But it was a good month overall. Then looking at what types of books I was reading, I read a lot of Kindle and audiobooks. Less physical books, but I was trying to finish up some books from the library. As you can see, I didn't finish them all. I have 5 books checked out from the library, which I feel like a broken record because it's the same books I've had checked out all year. But I did convince my librarians to check them back in and then check them back out to me because I had maxed out my holds. So come one way or the other, they're going to get finished or returned in April. But for now, I've got 2 finished, 1 that I'm halfway through, and then 2 more that I, like I said, either need to read it or just return it because I'm not interested enough to read it. I did read 2 Kindle books and I did read each day, which was my goal. I like to just kind of mark down the new releases. Sunrise on the Reaping is the Hunger Games prequel, or one of the Hunger Games prequels, because there's 2 now. Very excited to read that. I bought it. I haven't read it yet, hopefully in April. And then Our Infinite Fates was my book of the month. And then I'm waiting for Finley Donovan Digs Her Own Grave, hopefully to come from the library soon. I have all of the books that I started. I had 2 books that I didn't finish in the month, so that'll be finished up in April. And then I have my book bingo, where I basically pull prompts from my year-long reading challenges to put here. A lot of the ones that are monthly I'll put in here, and then I'll pull a couple of other ones that make sense for the month, and hopefully it makes me pick up a book that fits the prompt, so I can fill it out. So completed everything except for 2. And then I pulled a quote from Dumplin. If living in my own skin has taught me anything, it's that if it's not on your body, it's not yours to comment on. And then I just have some little notes, again, just trying to brainstorm what books would fit the challenges I pulled. And then going to my Goodreads tracker, this is from the Shelfie Chronicles, who is no longer open, but I like to track what type of media I'm reading. So I had a fair number of audiobooks. I also had a fair number of Kindle books. It's more evenly spaced or more evenly matched this time. But yeah, I am just moving and grooving right along. So far on track to meet my reading goals for the year, but I'm still on maternity leave, which helps. And then again, 11 books, which has been the most so far of the year. And then I have this tracker from JoJo's Pretty Paper Shop, and I colored in all of my March reads in green on the bookshelves. And then from Plan with Elise, I have these reading 50 and 100 books trackers, so I'm up to 26 books so far for the year. Then moving into the individual books, the first book that I read this month was Beauty. This was a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and that was one of the prompts for a reading challenge for February that I just didn't get to in February, so I wanted to finish it in March. And it was an okay book. I gave it 3 stars. it was a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but I felt like there was too much backstory. Probably about a third of the book is before we even get to the Beast. It's her living with her two sisters and her dad you know, losing his fortunes essentially, and them having to move far away from their home to this new place. And then, you know, that's eventually the, you know, town where where the castle's nearby, and she ends up going to meet the Beast eventually. But it just felt like there was too much backstory, there was too much lead up, and it really didn't make any lick of difference in the rest of the story. And to some extent, I mean, it followed the more traditional, I can't remember who wrote Beauty and the Beast, but it followed the more traditional fairy tale storyline, because I believe in the original fairy tale, she does have two sisters, and her dad's a merchant, and her sisters ask for like jewels and, you know, extravagant gifts when he travels, but she just asks for a rose, and that's how he ends up stealing the rose and, you know, kind of getting intertwined with the Beast. So it follows the more traditional fairy tale for the most part, but I feel like in the traditional fairy tale, her sisters are not, you know, very likable characters necessarily. And I think the author was trying to make them likable, but then it just, I don't know. Like I said, it didn't make any difference in the actual story of Beauty and the Beast in the castle. And so for me, I felt like it just kind of took away from the story, and I was just waiting for the Beauty and the Beast to start. And then I thought the ending, when the curse is broken or when they're about to break the curse, it just wrapped up way too fast. And so I felt like I wanted more explanation or more, you know, how it happened, why they got cursed, what went on, you know, with everyone. But instead it kind of wrapped up in like 10 pages and curse was broken, everyone was happy, done. So like I said, 3 stars, not my favorite. You know, it was fine. Then moving on to The Good Daughter. Like I said, this was my only 5-star for the month. And it's not necessarily that it was my favorite book. This book was dark. Like, it started off and it was jarring, I guess is a good word for it. The first initial chapter has a lot of graphic imagery when it comes to a murder. And then it's like the next chapter is a school shooting. And so it starts off very dark. And my sister recommended this book to me, and immediately I thought, I don't know if I can do this, but she said that it was good. And ultimately, like I said, I gave it 5 stars because I enjoyed the twists and the turns. I thought it was an interesting story. I thought it was different than thrillers that I've read before, but it definitely has some really dark moments, especially at the beginning. So if that's not your jam, skip it. So basically it's 2 sisters who, there's a home invasion, their mom is murdered, and they like run for their lives away from these killers. And now it's 28 years later, there's a school shooting, and their father, who's a lawyer, and he's a lawyer who takes like the bad criminals, you know, no one else would take their cases. They're not good people, which is part of the reason why they got involved with their mom getting murdered in the first place. He ends up being the lawyer for the girl who's at the heart of the school shooting, who is the shooter. So it definitely has some depth. There's, you know, a couple of different stories going on at the same time, which is interesting. And like I said, ultimately I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was good. Not necessarily that I enjoyed this book the most out of the month, because there's some 4 stars that I maybe had a more fun time reading, but I picked this as my favorite because ultimately it was a good book. Next up, I have American Story, A Lifetime Search for Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things. I've had this one on my TBR for basically since I started Goodreads. And so this year I've been trying to read 25 books in 25 that are things on my TBR that I've just ignored. And so this is one of them. Part of the reason why I've had trouble reading it is it's not something that was available on Libby, and so I had to get a physical copy of it. So this is one of my library books that I've been trying to finish for the last 3 months, but I finally got around to reading it, and this was good. It's Bob Dodson, which I don't know that I've ever actually watched Bob Dodson, but he basically spent, I think it was something like 40 years of his career covering these kind of small stories or people that are not celebrities, but just people doing interesting things, people doing, kind of hopeful stories, people that had, hardships and came out of it. So just kind of those human interest pieces, he tells stories like that. Growing up, I would watch Steve Hartman, which again, similar vein, that he just tells these, 5-minute stories to wrap up a person's, story or their life. And, it's just ordinary people. So I liked it. I liked the stories they told. I will say, some of the stories I felt like were a little short. I wanted more details, and obviously he's picking stories from throughout his entire career. So, there are going to be things that he can't include or, time-wise can't get to every detail. But there were some stories that I felt were a little short. And then some of the transitions were a little rough. Just, we'd be in one story, and then I would think we would be moving on to another story, but then I'd realize it was still the same story. But then other times, when he would have like a paragraph break, it would be a different story. So I just felt like editing, or I don't know, sometimes it just wasn't obvious if you had moved on to a different story or if it was the same story. And then, like I said, sometimes it just didn't flow or transition very smoothly. So I gave it 4 stars, probably like a 3.5 rounded up to 4, but I enjoyed it. It had some good moments. I think I cried even once in one of the stories. So, definitely just kind of an uplifting kind of book. Then I have The Likeness. This is the second story in the, it's like the Dumplin Murder Squad, I think is the series. It's a crime novels set in Ireland, and I read the first one, I think it might have been 2 years. I don't even think it was last year. I think it was 2 years ago. And so I decided to pick this one up. I can't remember why. I think it was just available, or I think it was like a lucky day on Libby, so I picked it up. I will say, since it's been a long time from reading the first book to the second, a lot of times with detective novels, you can kind of read them in any order, or a lot of times you're not missing much to read them out of order or whatnot. A lot of times they'll fill you in on what happened. A lot of times it's more about the mystery you're solving right now than, the overarching story throughout. A lot of the times. Like, I could pick up any Agatha Christie novel, pretty much, and it wouldn't matter if it was number 10 in the series or number 1. For the most part, you're just focused on the mystery at hand. This one was different. There was a lot of reference to the first book, and again, since it's been 2 years, a year and a half since I've read the first book, it was tough to remember what happened. I even tried to Google what happened, and then it came up as a Google search, so obviously other people were trying to figure it out too. And like, I kind of remember what happened, but not really, and then I couldn't really find what happened in book 1. So there were some things that they just kept bringing up, and like I said, for the life of me, I just couldn't quite get back. I wish it would have been more blatantly obvious, a more blatant recap of book 1, since they kept bringing up so much about what happened in book 1. So moving past that, which is part of the reason why I knocked a star off, You have Detective Cassie Maddox, and years ago she was an undercover detective, and now someone just got murdered who looks just like her. They could be twins, and that person was using the alias that she used when she was undercover. So they're trying to figure out, you know, obviously what happened to this person, and, you know, was someone trying to kill Cassie, or, you know, this undercover alias, you know, kind of what was going on there. And so Cassie goes undercover as the victim. Basically, they say that the victim survived this stabbing, even though she died, so that Cassie can go undercover and try to, you know, kind of infiltrate her inner circle of friends, because she has 4 friends slash roommates. I think it's 4. And, you know, they're basically, they can't get information out of them. So she decides to go undercover to pose as this person, yeah, to find out who killed her. So it's kind of a, you know, very unrealistic storyline anyways, because I feel like if you're trying to pose as someone, you're not going to get it all right. But, you know, they use the story that there's a lot of videos that this deceased person took, and so she, you know, pulls a lot from these videos, pulls a lot from, you know, everything that they uncover before she goes undercover. They did a lot of research and stuff, and more or less she pulls it off. Yeah, it was interesting. It, you know, like I said, an off-the-wall premise that really probably would never happen in real life, but it was interesting, and for the most part I enjoyed it. I will say it took a lot of like lead up for her deciding that she wanted to go undercover, and I mean, obviously she's going to go undercover because that's the whole book, but it felt like it took like a third of the book for her to basically work out that, yes, I'm going to go undercover. So that just kind of felt a little slow, and then once she actually went undercover, it moved a little faster. Next up, I have The Downstairs Girl. I gave this one 3 stars. This one I didn't like as much as I thought I would. It was a Reese's book club pick, and I don't know, I thought I would like it a lot, but it was just okay for me. Basically, you have Jo Kwon, and she is a lady's maid. She is a lady's maid in this household in, I think, Georgia is where they live. She's Asian American, and there's a lot of racism with basically anyone that wasn't white, but even to Asians. During this time frame, it's about, I can't remember if it's like the late 1800s or early 1900s, somewhere in that time period. And you know, so obviously they have a lot of, you know, racial storylines, I guess, which was interesting because I don't think I've read a lot of stories set in this time period with an Asian character, so that I really appreciated or enjoyed. And it's called The Downstairs Girl because she and her adopted father live basically in an underground, like in an abandoned underground railroad station, beneath the house of a newspaper writer or newspaper family. And yeah, they don't know that they are living in more or less their basement. And she's able to eavesdrop in on the upstairs conversations, and the newspaper is failing. They need, you know, something to help keep them afloat, otherwise they're going to have to close their doors. And she decides to anonymously drop off like an advice column, and, you know, to help the paper, and to also, you know, kind of put her opinion out there and, you know, whatnot. So it was an interesting one. There were a lot of different things that happened, and a lot of things that just were resolved really easily, that it felt like it was unrealistic, that it would have taken more time for some of these problems to be solved, or that they wouldn't have been solved at all. So, you know, 3 stars for being somewhat unrealistic, and there were some storylines that I just didn't jive with as much as others. And there were times that I got bored, so that's part of the reason why I gave it 3 stars. It was okay, not my favorite. Next we have Beginner's Luck. This one was, I think, my only romance for the month. Yeah, this was my only romance for the month. I read it because it has the name, or has luck in the title, which for March. And essentially you have a lab tech named Kit, and she's this brilliant lab tech who's, you know, more or less you presume that she's smarter than a lot of the scientists that she works with, but she's just a lowly lab tech. But a recruiter for kind of like a major science company wants her to be recruited to work for them, but she's really against it. She doesn't want to change the status flow. She just wants to be in her position. She likes the people she works with. She likes where she's at. She doesn't want change. And so Ben is the one that's recruiting for the company, and the only reason he's back in his hometown, he's technically on like family leave from the company because his dad was in an accident and he's helping take care of him while he recovers. But since she's in this hometown, you know, he does a favor for his job, essentially, to try to recruit her while he's back in town. But then they end up, you know, forming a friendship and, you know, kind of just hanging out with each other more than just the professionalism of trying to recruit her for this company. His dad owns a salvage yard, so that's kind of an interesting plot line, and she has an old house that she's renovating, you know, so then a lot of times, you know, they're able to help each other out in that regard. Yeah, I don't know, it was interesting. And then part of the story, which really doesn't come up that much, is that it's called Beginner's Luck because it's their first time playing the lottery, she and her 2 friends, and they win the lottery. So that's like the beginning of the story, and that's part of the reason why she doesn't need to be wooed by this giant company offering her a big salary and things like that, is because she just won the lottery. She doesn't need any of that financial stability. But it was fine. It was 3 stars. Like I said, nothing bad necessarily. I liked a lot of the characters. Yeah, I thought the characters were pretty well written. Next, moving on, I have Spy Mom. This is another one that I've had on my list for a really long time to read. They don't even print the book anymore. And this one's an interesting one because this is what I had on my Goodreads, is Spy Mom and then this cover. But when I was looking at it more, when I ordered the book, because I had to buy it from like a used bookstore because they didn't have it at the library, they don't make it anymore, etc. I had to find it used somewhere. This is 2 books in one, but the interesting thing is, I can't remember what the first book is called. I don't know what the second book is called either. Neither of them is called Spy Mom, but the first book is printed separately, so you could buy just the first book, and it has a totally different cover, obviously, different name. But the second book, which is in this duology, or, you know, double issue, you can't find separately. It was only published in this 2-book edition, which is interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that in a book. So technically this is 2 books, and it should count as 2 books, but since it's only in one and I can only mark it as 1 book on Goodreads, and I don't want it to mess up how many pages I read throughout the year, I'm counting it as 1, but technically I have a +1. I'm technically at 27 books. But essentially you have this spy, Sally Sin, and she retired from the spy game and decided to get married, have a family, and leave her past behind her. But of course, you know, the past never stays hidden for long. Her family, like, no one knows that she was a spy. I think the cover story is she was like a data analyst or something like that for a government agency. That was just super boring, so no one ever asks about details. But of course she gets roped back in. There's someone from her past that has reappeared, a former enemy, and so she gets sucked back in one last time to try to capture this enemy. And then of course, you know, there's another book, so then she gets sucked back in again in book 2. It's told, basically every other chapter is either a flashback or present day. And I think it worked really well in book 1. And then in book 2, I think they were just trying to recreate the same formula as book 1. And so the flashbacks were a little bit more haphazard. The first book has, you know, kind of a common enemy. And then the second one, I don't know, it was just a little less believable. And I just didn't enjoy it as much. But I wanted to finish it because, yeah, this is what I've had on my book list, not knowing that it was 2 books. And so I didn't want to change it. And I bought it, so I was just going to read it. But all in all, 3 stars. It was fine. I don't think spy books are necessarily my niche anyways. Moving on, I also had Dumplin on my 25 and 25 list. And Dumplin, I've seen the movie. It's been a few years. I should watch it again. But I remember enjoying the movie, and I think that was how I put the book on my list. But you have Willow Dean Dixon, I think, or Willow Dean something. And she's, you know, kind of an overweight girl in high school, you know, not very popular. People, you know, have issues with her weight or talk about her weight, things like that. And her mom is a former beauty queen who runs this pageant in her town. And her aunt, who I think was also a very overweight person, she passed away, and Willow Dean was really close to her, and so that kind of comes up throughout. But her aunt really loved Dolly Parton, and Willow Dean also has this love of Dolly Parton, which comes up a lot throughout the book. Ultimately, the book ends up with Willow Dean entering the pageant and, you know, participating in this pageant, kind of like a why not. But it was an interesting, like, coming of age story. There's, you know, dating, there's obviously dealing with friendship and, you know, kind of changes that people go through as they get older. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was overall pretty good. There were things that I liked more than others, but at its heart, I enjoyed it a lot. 4 stars. There's more books in the series. I don't know that I'll pick them up necessarily, but this one was a fun time. Then moving on, I have Dear Girls by Ali Wong. I also gave this one 4 stars. And in terms of books that I enjoyed the most, even though I only gave this one 4 stars, I really enjoyed the audiobook of this. Obviously she's a comedian, so she's a good storyteller, and so having her narrate the audiobook made it really fun. She also had a lot of stories about pregnancy and motherhood, which that's the time in my life that I'm in, and so that hit nicely, I guess, or hit the spot. I laughed out loud a number of times. She can get quite crass, so I mean, if that's something that you're not into, obviously this would not be the book for you, but it was enjoyable. I thought it was, you know, only a 6-hour audiobook, not a very long one, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good time, and I knew nothing about Ali Wong before this, and now I just went on to Netflix and watched her 4 specials that she had, which some of the stories are similarly in here, but there was also content that wasn't in, or that was in here that wasn't in her Netflix specials, and vice versa. But ultimately I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good one. Then I read The Bookwoman's Daughter, which is the sequel to The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek, which I read last month. And this one, they said you could read it as a standalone, and I could definitely see that. They give enough backstory in this one where if you didn't read the first one, you could still make it through the book and be fine. But I would recommend reading both books if you're interested in it. It takes place in Kentucky, and basically you have the pack horse librarians, which technically she's not a pack horse librarian because that program ended, and essentially it's the library revamping it versus being a New Deal project. But essentially she's a librarian who delivers books to the backcountry houses of Kentucky and, you know, kind of these hard to reach patrons to make sure that they can read. And so in this one, you're following Honey, and essentially, I don't want to give too much away, but essentially you're just following Honey as she's going through a lot of hardships while her parents are not in the picture for most of this book. And since she's underage, she's trying to get her freedom so that she doesn't get taken to essentially like the orphan like work program. And so a lot of it is her, you know, kind of fighting the law. There's a lot of law kind of mixed in there. A lot also with this one, you have a lot of focus on women that are in male dominated careers. So you have like a character in the book who's a miner, but she's a woman. You have someone who's a fire watcher, like from the fire towers, who's a woman. And so that is a theme throughout it. I will say some of it's a little heavy-handed. Like almost all of the men you meet in the book are just like kind of crappy characters, kind of mean, you know, have no respect for the women. All the women are like these strong, you know, nice characters that are just amazing and excellent. And so some of that just felt a little bit much at times, but all in all, it's a, you know, feel good historical fiction. It was a good time. But like I said, sometimes it just felt like it was hitting you over the head a little bit with the themes. It could have been a little more subtle at times. Then the last book I read this month was Murder Road. This is by Simone St. James, and I've read almost all of Simone St. James's. I think there's a couple that I still have to pick up, but my favorite is The Sundown Motel. That was the first one I read from her. This is probably my second favorite. I really enjoyed this one. And I'd heard mixed things about it, so I didn't think it would be a 4-star read. I feel like most of the people that I saw read it gave it like a 2 or 3 stars, but I really enjoyed it. So you have these honeymooners. They're driving up to one of the Great Lakes. They live in Michigan. They're driving up to one of the Great Lakes for their honeymoon. They just got married. They're driving late at night. They miss their turn, or they turn onto the wrong road, and they're on this kind of desolate stretch of road, and there's someone walking on the side of the road. They offer her a ride into town, and the person's kind of hesitant, but ultimately she gets in the car with them. Once she's in the car and they start driving, they realize that she's been stabbed and she's bleeding out. So they rush her to the hospital. She ends up dying, and then the police are immediately on them, obviously as primary suspects, because, you know, maybe they killed this woman. And then they find out that this is not the first murder that's taken place on this stretch of road. These murders have been happening for like over 20 years. And the first victim, known as the Lost Girl, was never identified. And the killer for all of these people has never been identified. So Simone St. James has, you know, like a paranormal aspect to a lot of the thrillers. And, you know, it was a good time, kind of like a little bit ghost story, a little bit horror, a little bit thriller. All in all, I read it in, you know, like 3 days. So I enjoyed it. And plus too, it was an easy read. Like the font was pretty big. The spacing was pretty big. So it wasn't a hard read anyways. So anyways, that was everything I read this month. 11 books, doing well. I have, April is the last month of my maternity leave, and then I go back to work again in May. So I'm trying to read as much as I can in April, because I'm not sure what things will look like once I'm back at work and have less free time. So we'll see. We'll see if I make my reading goals for the end of the year, but for now, I'm just enjoying reading whenever I can. So I hope you enjoyed listening, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye now.